Well, as they say, a demo is worth 1,000 PowerPoints. So let's get into our first demo here of reviewing our model view model design pattern. We're going to use a .NET MAUI application to do this. And I'm going to call it, ooh, big surprise. Now don't worry, we don't get into the Microsoft Office, the patient doctor stuff right away, but eventually I'm going to reuse this project for something along that line. So that's one reason why I'm doing it this way. I'm giving it that name initially. Let's come here to my work, and we'll select that folder. Okay, we're ready to move on to the next step. I'm going to, at this point, still go back to .NET 7, as we've discussed before. So before I do anything else, I'm just going to actually run the application. I'm going to use the Android emulator for this. Sorry, as you know, it takes a little while, especially the first time you're getting the emulator up and running your project, but I haven't changed any of the code. I just want to show you the standard scaffolded project as it gets built. Almost there, I think. There we go, starting to come to life. All right, hello world. Yes, and I can click and click how many times I want, and away we go. All right, so we haven't changed anything yet. I'm going to stop running for now. As we know, following any design pattern, it's good to have your code organized in harmony with the pattern. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my different folders. I'm going to add 3 folders in total. MVVM, so we're going to need models. Add a folder for views. And last but not least, we'll need one for view models. Okay, now one of the first things I'm going to do, the main page itself, I'm going to just drag and drop into the views folder. Yes, please. Sure, it doesn't actually do a perfect job. We're going to have to fix some of that up ourselves. Okay, so here on the page itself, we have the namespace for the class itself, so we're going to have to modify that. Now we've put it inside a subfolder, so views. And in the code behind, same thing here. And there's one more place where we have to fix it up, the app shell. Right here, local. Okay. There we go. So we've rearranged the structure here. So I do want to just run it again to kind of prove to you that we haven't broken anything, just a little bit of namespace adjustment, and we should be fine. Okay, yeah, so we see we're up and running again, and all the exact same functionality I had before, no problem at all. So I just want to show you that we haven't broken anything, but we haven't actually implemented anything about MVVM yet other than making a few folders, right? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come to the View Models folder. We're going to right-click. We're going to add a class in here. So I'm going to call it, well, this is going to be the view model for our main view, our main page, right? So to follow a naming convention, now I could technically call it anything I want, but to follow a convention, I'm going to call it main, same name as our view, but I'll just call it main view model. Okay, first thing I'll do is I'll make it public. Now there's still at this point, other than a naming convention, there's nothing that actually ties it or associates it with the actual main page, our view itself, right? We're going to have to do that ourselves. And for the sake of the parser inside XAML, maybe I should just take a moment and talk about how a page works, right? We have the XAML because that's how we decided to create the project. Really, this is a short form for writing a whole bunch of C# code, right? Which is why the code behind, you notice, is a partial class, okay? As a partial class, then it can be combined with the code being generated from our XAML to make a single class, a single object written in C#. Okay, so coming back to main page here, what I want to do is I want to add another namespace then, so I can start building the bridge, so to speak, between this view and the view model itself. So I'm going to add an XML namespace. I'm going to call it VM for view model. And I think IntelliSense should be able to help me out here. I'll just start typing, and there we go. There's our view models namespace, and then we've added that. All right, so that's one step in the right direction, but we're going to do another thing that is reminiscent, so to speak, of what we did back with our MVC applications, where we would take a view and make it a strongly typed view. Well, to do something very equivalent to that, we're going to define the data type for the actual view itself, and we're going to set that to, in our view model namespace, of course, the actual main view model. Okay. So far so good, but we're not done yet, okay? We've set the data type here, but in the code behind, we also have to get it in place here. So I could come down and just, sorry, ignore the red underlining. It's just the system is a little slow getting everything happy again. But basically what I could do is I could define the binding context. And basically I could new up, like we often do, right? New up a main view model, and so on and so forth. But I don't want to do that because we're trying as much as possible. One of the reasons for taking time to use the model view model pattern is we want to get as much separation of concerns as possible, right? And this immediately creates a dependency that I can't, work with the main page without the view model and kind of vice versa, right? So instead of just newing it up inside the constructor here, what I really want to do is I want to actually add it to my dependency injection, and then that way I'll inject it. Later on, then I could always inject a fake or a mock object instead if I needed to for unit testing purposes, right? So coming to the Maui program, right, here is where I have my services that I can build. So I'm going to come in here, use the builder, services, I have to spell it right and everything. Oh my goodness. And I'm going to add here. Now it can be a singleton because I'm only going to ever need one main page, right? We'll add a singleton, main page. Nope. Sorry, got the wrong. That's what I get for typing, right? There we go. Now it's saying, hey, wait a second. Kind of missing something here. I need a using, right, for the views folder. But I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Take advantage of the IntelliSense and just change this. We want our main view model. And once more, add the using for the view models namespace. Okay, so now I've got that here in the Maui program. I can come back to the code behind page, and instead of doing all that, I will just actually call it VM, use dependency injection, right? Then now I can define the binding context is this view model object. That's it. Okay. So that does, right, now get the marriage in place, so to speak, between the view and the view model itself, right? Okay. Now, what are we going to do with our view model? Well, essentially, we're going to start off demonstrating use of one of the original ways of getting model view model in place, and that is to implement an interface called INotifyPropertyChanged. Now there's a little bit more to it than just that as well. We're going to also add this little private bit of work. Right, so the idea is we can call this internally, pass in a property, and it will invoke this public event of letting the whole system know about the property has changed. Well, that sounds like an interesting thing to do, but how is it actually going to work for us? Well, let's add a property here. I'm going to make just a simple prop tab. It'll be a string. Oh. I'm just going to call it name. Okay. So that's a property. Now, to really use our code here, our private notify property changed, what I really want to do is I want to add something to the setter. So I could break this out. Okay, this is a kind of a short form for a property, right? I could break it out into the separate bits of code, make the private the backing field and so on. But you know what? There is, instead of going prop, I can go prop, whoop, full. And when I tab, see it creates the backing variable, okay? And I can make that my string. Now, there's different naming conventions you can use. Some developers like to use like a small letter as the first letter of the actual backing field. Some people like to use the underscore. I'm going to follow that convention for now. I'm going to call it underscore name. Down here, it would just be name is the actual public property to go along with the backing field, right? So then I have my getter and my setter, right? So I'm going to lay this out just a little bit more fully here. And the get is fine. We're just going to basically return the name, right? But in the setter, I want to do a bit of more work here. It makes sense to me, before we go calling to notify everybody about a property change, let's make sure it's actually changed, right? So I'll put an if to compare the value being set, okay, with the name. And if it is the same, I'll just return. That's good enough. I'm not actually changing anything. Now, if it does change, then this line of code makes sense, right? I'll set my backing, okay, the underscore name to the value, but that's not all. I want to, as well, in the setter, call my notify property changed, right? And that will then pass the information on, let everybody know, hey, guess what? This property has now got a different value. Now, to see it in action, we have to do some changes to our main page, to the view itself. So let's go to the XAML here. I'm going to come down, and you know, I don't really have much use for this particular label, so I'm going to replace it with an entry, right? Key thing here, now that we actually have defined the data type, made this a strongly typed view with our main view model as the type, now I can come in here, the text property of this placeholder, I'm going to bind to the actual name property I've exposed from my view model object, right, called name. And then what I can do up here, this label, it says hello world. Well, I can just change it. So I can bind the text property of it exactly to the same property. Binding name. Okay. And let's just run it now to see this actually, INotifyPropertyChanged in action. Okay, we're almost up and running. There we go. So you see where my placeholder enters something, I can come down here and immediately all the changes I make in the entry are immediately shown in the label because of the property binding and the way INotifyPropertyChanged works. Very neat, eh? Okay. Well, that's good. All right, so that is an example of one way we can get an implementation in place of INotifyPropertyChanged. Great. But you know what? We're still at this point using the code behind for all the counter-click business, right? Or the clicked event and handling that. Well, ideally, we want to get not just properties, but event handlers out of the code behind and deal with them in our view model as well. That's one issue. Plus, coming back to the view model, okay, we got a fair bit of code here to do something quite simple, right? So we're going to see how we can address both of these issues with the help of a nice, friendly NuGet package, right? I'm going to come down here. I could do it on the console, I guess. Oh, it doesn't like the console today, so I'm going to come back. Let's try again. There we go. I just had to get out and back in again to deal with that. Okay, install package. What's the package? Well, there's a link, of course, up in our course to have a look at the documentation for this, but it's CommunityToolkit.Mvvm, right? So we'll install that package. And this is going to make doing the model view model design pattern much, much easier, okay? All right, so now that's in place. Let me come back to my view model itself. So all this code that we were so proud of that we wrote, okay? I'm going to make a few changes here. First of all, what this package is, this community-sponsored package, this Community Toolkit, is going to do for us is it's going to take over automatically generating a lot of this kind of code for me. But to work with the class itself, I have to first of all make it partial. So I'm going to make it a partial class. I'm going to, instead of INotifyPropertyChanged and implementing that interface, I'm going to actually inherit from a class provided in our toolkit called observable object, right? Now that I've done that, all of this code, I'm going to take out everything here except for the actual backing variable, right? And I'm going to annotate it as a observable property. And believe it or not, everything should still work. Okay, just running the app again. Hopefully. Here we go. All right. And one more time. There you go. So you see we're getting the exact same functionality we had, even though we've taken all of that code out of the view model and just used the community toolkit, right, for model view model. So that's a great thing. We're half done, okay, what we want to get done in this initial bit of work here. However, we haven't addressed that other issue I talked about, getting the event handler out of the code behind itself and back into the view model, right? Well, let me tell you this. Basically, coming back to the XAML, you see, this is how it works right now. We have our clicked event, right? So our button defines the clicked event to the code that is in the code behind, and away it goes. Does its wonderful thing. Great. Fortunately, most, not all, but most elements in our XAML that have a clicked event, you will find also have something else. They have a command, right? So instead of using the click event, I'm going to use a command. Now, I probably should make it first, but we're going to be brave, and I'm going to say that I'm going to bind. That's the thing about a command, is we can actually bind it. A click event we can't directly. I'm going to establish the binding to, I'm going to call it counter. I'm going to say clicked command. Okay. Now, for this to work, it's going to be bound to the actual view model, right? Also, while I'm here, I'm going to change the text. Instead of it saying click me, I'm going to get it from a property exposed by the view model. I'm going to bind it. I'm going to call it our counter button. btn text, right? So I'll get all of that information out of the page itself and into the view model by using these bindings. So let me come back to the main view model now, which is pretty darn plain. All we have is this one observable property, right? So I'm going to add another private, okay? Private string. It won't be description. I'm going to call it my counter button text, right? That's that property that we said we're going to bind to have the text appear on the button, okay? Now I can even set it to an initial value here. But what we really want to do, oh, look at that IntelliSense, is make it an observable property, right? So this is what we're going to actually update every time we click the button. We're going to change this text, and that is now bound to the actual element on the page itself, so we'll be able to show the new value every time we click the button, right? Okay, now in terms of the actual counter clicked and all that, right? And that command that we added, well, we are going to need a simple variable, a simple integer to maintain our count. That's good, right? And then we're going to make a method here, okay? Void counter clicked. Now, I want to point out something. We called it counter clicked here, going back to the main page in the binding. Notice we're binding to a command, counter clicked command, right? So the word command is automatically added here for us when we use the toolkit to associate this to it. So how are we going to actually make it work in relation? We've seen with our properties, we annotate them with observable property. For a command, what we annotate is relay command. It's an implementation of iCommand. You might have used that before in other work you've done, right? So a relay command allows us then to bind to this as a command exposed from our view model itself. So the code we're going to put in here is pretty straightforward, almost identical, right, at least in concept, to what we did in the code behind page, right? Every time we click this, we'll implement our little integer, right? And then we're going to update our property here. Now notice, of course, this is the property, right? So the backing variable is a private string, okay, with the underscore. So we don't use the underscore in the name of the property. So we'll say clicked how many times, and away we go. Okay. So that's the difference between the backing field and the property itself showing up once again. Well, now we have this in place. Coming back here, I don't need this anymore, right? I don't need any of this anymore. It's not being used. So look at that, how clean and simple our code behind is. All we really have is what's necessary to inject our view model into the constructor and set it as the binding context. Nothing else is actually required, okay, in our code behind anymore. So we've really gone pretty much as far as we can in terms of moving everything, all the functionality for properties and commands, events, etc., into the view model, out of the page. So that's it. We're happy. What we've done now accomplishes everything we initially set out to do in this first part of our demo. So I'm just going to run it one last time here. Oh, coming up pretty quick this time. Just to prove that we actually have everything in place. So I can enter something, but I can also click my button, and every time I do, I update the text on the button. There we go. Perfect. Exactly the functionality we wanted, and away we go. All right. So that's the end of our first demo.